Hey, Husker fans, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me as always for this podcast as my host is Danny Gillette. And we're back here after a little break with another episode of the podcast. And we've got, a few things to talk about. Number one on the list is Nebraska basketball and their struggles recently. And we're also going to talk about some special teams coach updates, even if there really isn't any. Also, about how Matt Rule killed Paul Feinbaum the other day on the internet, so that was kind of fun. So we're going to talk about all that stuff, the transfer portal, the Nebraska football roster. So before we get into that, please make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, get into the comments section. And Danny, how are you doing on this Thursday morning?
I'm very cold. I can't wait till spring. And yeah, I'm not really. Even my dog is snoring in the blankets over here, so we're not. We don't like the cold. And I'm thinking of warmer weather and spring ball and start of next season already. But before we get to there, we still have a lot of stuff to iron out, and hopefully, hopefully Nebraska basketball can get hot because they are ice cold right now.
Yeah, it's crazy how things have changed so quickly for Nebraska basketball. After the UCLA game, it seemed like, personally, I thought that they could be a title contender in the Big Ten, or at least a team that
Likewise.
could be, in the top four, in the top five, one of those teams. The defense looked great. Bryce Williams was on fire. And it just seems like things have fallen off. And it's hard to say exactly where, it's gone wrong because it's been kind of a multitude of things. But it does seem like, turnovers, poor 3-point defense, offensive rebounding hurt Nebraska the other night. Definitely, it seems like I don't want to call out the effort, but it does seem like teams, like USC wanted it more. I mean, USC is one of the worst offensive rebounding teams in the country, and they come in on your home floor and get 12 offensive rebounds. I mean, that's not a great sign.
Mm-mm.
And, you just Juwan Gary and Bryce Williams are just having to do too much. I mean, frankly, I think that that's the biggest problem because, you look at it's difficult to be a high usage player and also be an effective defender. And I think we've seen with Juwan Gary having to take on more usage this year, his defense hasn't quite been as good. And I think with some of Bryce Williams' struggles offensively, I think you look at USC last or 2 nights ago, and those guys both had to play had to guard top players on offense, and that wears you down. And I think Nebraska is almost asking a little too much out of Bryce and Juwan Gary, and some other guys have to step up. And frankly, I'm just not sure that they're capable of doing it right now.
And we saw this a little bit at the end of last year as well, right? When Casey Tominaga did struggle in some games, we saw Bryce and Juan really have to step up and kind of take on a bigger role, and they helped us through the first couple games of the Big Ten tournament, especially. I remember Bryce went off. I think it was the game before Illinois. I can't remember off the top of my head who they played at the time, but this high volume, high usage, kind of game plan that this team had around them was evident as early as last year, and now we're seeing it this year, except I think a little bit much earlier in the season. And I think for his faults defensively, Tominaga's ability to shoot the ball from the three and kind of be that automatic 3-point shooter is something that this team is really missing right now. And I think that he was able to really kind of get points in bunches, obviously, and that took the load off guys like Gary and Williams to primarily focus on playing defense. And now that they really don't have, and you talked about this at the beginning of the season, they really don't have, a quick trigger 3-point shooter. That's kind of been a notable deficiency in this team's offensive game, the entire season. So, I think having a knockdown 3-point shooter is something that this team is missing, and I think it's affecting other areas on the court due to players having to do way too much.
Yeah, and on Wednesday they shot 5 for 24 from 3-point range, which was a big factor. Juwan was 0 for 5, Bryce 2 for 8, Berkey went 0 for 3. Connor Essegian did shoot well. I mean, he was 3 of 6, so he had a solid day off the bench. But yeah, it was interesting. Fred made the change to Raleigh from Raleigh Wooster to Aaron Eulis at the starting point guard position, and that did not go well. He ended up playing only 14 minutes. He was 0 for 1 from the field, 3 rebounds, 0 assists. And the point guard position's been a disappointment. It really has been. Raleigh Wooster's played well at times offensively, but the defense, as much as I talked him up defensively, it's not been good. And, you look at, and frankly, looking at the advanced stats, nobody on the team right now is defending well. I mean, every single player on the team that's like a rotation player, almost all of them are, their defensive rating is over 100, over 1 point per possession. So like, they're just not doing a great job. This is, his defensive rating is a little bit better, I guess, from last year, but just, I thought that he would do better in a man-to-man sense. And he really is just, he looks a step slow at times in man-to-man defense and rotations. And, it's just, to me, it's really frustrating because a lot of the things that I see from Nebraska are, poor closeouts, poor contests, fundamental things that they were doing at the start of the season and that they're not doing now. And, you just, in the Big Ten or in major college basketball, if you don't close out hard and you don't have a hand in the guy's face, like that's 3 points. It's a wide open bucket. And I mean, it just, you look at the thing that disappointed me about, the USC game, their 3-point defense in the second half, but also, like I mentioned, the offensive rebounds, they rebounded 32% of their offensive rebounds, of their misses, USC did. And they were one of the worst offensive rebounding teams in the country. And that, to me, right there is a glaring red flag because, when I went into that game, it was like, okay, you can't turn the ball, you can't lose the turnover battle and the offensive rebounding battle. And they did. And so, I always, when I coached basketball, I always told my players that rebounding was about effort, because I think it is, and it's about toughness. And Fred Hoiberg, after the last game, he called out this team for a lack of toughness, and then to come home again in a must-win game for the second straight time and get out rebounded, like I don't know how this team is going to come back from that. And I think they are in a lot of trouble, and I don't think Fred Hoiberg's going to be in trouble yet, but this season could get really ugly. I mean, you look at the next 3 games. Wisconsin on the road, Illinois at home, at Oregon, and then at Washington State. So you have 3 ranked teams, 3 ranked teams, and then and the second part of those 2 are West Coast road trips, which are hard to win. And Nebraska hasn't won a conference road game yet. So, I mean, it's either going to get really bad or it's going to get better. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see how things play out over the next 4 games.
I mean, to me, there's also a lack of athleticism. And it seems like for these last couple of Fred Hoiberg teams, there has been a lack of athleticism. So, and I'm going to ask this question to you because you probably, have, a little bit better insight on this. But we've talked about Fred Hoiberg's, how he's used the transfer portal over the past couple seasons and how he's built teams and how he's been, successful in doing so. I mean, they made the NCAA tournament last season, so it hasn't been all bad, right? But at what point do you think Hoiberg needs to focus more on high school recruiting? I know that's not really the way of college basketball, but when you look at what he's done for high school recruiting, the returns haven't exactly been great either.
Yeah, it's high school basketball recruiting is so tough right now for college. And I do think that they've got some nice players committed, in this class with Janowski.
Yep.
It's, and they got Brandon Frager in the 2024 class. I mean, he was one of the best players in the state of Nebraska. But, it's just tough for the Huskers. What's really frustrating, and I think probably for Nebraska fans, is to see all these players from Nebraska who are having an impact in other states. And I don't know if that's going to continue to happen in terms of like the players coming here, but it is disappointing. And we even saw, Nebraska try to recruit some of these guys in the transfer portal and weren't able to get them. So I don't know why they can't get the best players in the state. That is disappointing after they've made the NCAA tournament. So I don't know if it's like a deal with wins or what it is, but they do have to find a way to start, if there's good players in the state of Nebraska, they have to start landing those. And I think it starts there. It's kind of, like football recruiting. You got to get the guys close to home, and then they should have a bigger presence just in the Midwest in general. And in high school recruiting, they really don't. So Fred's never essentially been about that, but it's going to be interesting to see if that's, that becomes a better focus, because it is tough when you solely focus on the transfer portal. Like, this can be what happens. You can have, one great season and one really down season. So that's the hard thing when you're rebuilding your team every single year.
But there shouldn't have been a down season. This should not have been a down season, and it's trending that way. I thought this team was going to be better than last year's, but now I have my doubts.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I definitely thought that they could at least be better, but I do think that, yeah, we're definitely underestimated the impact of Keisei Tominaga and just having, a special player like that. I mean, a guy who's still playing in the G League, and Bryce Williams can be that guy. I mean, he was that guy for a couple possessions. Like, that's what was really frustrating is, they were down by 4 or 5 points, and Bryce, hits a 2-pointer and then hits a fadeaway three with the guy in his face. And then, we have a chance to tie and he throws the ball away. It's like, and the whole last minute I thought was really, that was some of the worst execution I've seen from like a Fred Hoiberg team. I mean, like, not even the possession. We were down by 3, and Connor Segan eventually got a layup off of it. I mean, he eventually cut and got a layup, but that possession was terrible. I mean, they wasted almost the entire clock just dribbling it out. And there was like 30 some, you know what I mean, down by 3. And I felt the same way when they did a slight play with Berkey got a hoop, he got open, but it just felt like they had no idea what they were doing down the stretch, and it just felt really weird. It was like, are they not listening in the timeouts? And then I noticed, or I read somewhere, that in the last timeout, a number of the players stayed on the bench. There was, like the guys who were in the game, were in the huddle, but other players were in the bench. Now, that's just something I read. I haven't verified that with my own eyes or anything, but if that's the case, I do think that shows that the culture is not where it needs to be. And I'm not, you can blame Fred Hoiberg for that. It is his fault. He's the head coach, but I don't know how you fix it. But it just seems like this team is on the wrong way. They're on the one-way path to the wrong way. I don't know how else to say it.
It seems like they're exhausted. It seems like they're exhausted already, and it's not even, we've got a good chunk of the season left, and the Big Ten tournament. So the fact that they're exhausted now is not a good sign.
But yeah, and then you just shared this tweet with me. But look at all the guys who are playing with other programs: Chucky Hepburn, Hunter Salis, Josh Dix, Latrell Whitesell, Frankie Fiddler, St. Thomas, who we just saw the other night for USC, John Tonje, Jason Green, William Kyle, who's been playing well for UCLA, Isaac Trout, Locke Ware, I'm not sure exactly how to say it. I'm bad with names, people, sorry. Sharif Mitchell, Sam Hoiberg, all these guys in the Metro Omaha area. This is a tweet from Mike Souter, kind of with that information. And so, yeah, it is pretty striking to look at that list and to think that none of those players played for Nebraska. And I know they
Sam
tried.
Hoiberg is the only guy on that list.
Well, yeah, you're right. Sam Hoiberg.
I'm just saying in general, like out of all, like you could build a NCAA tournament team with
team.
All those players and Sam Hoiberg. And I'm not taking anything away from Sam Hoiberg, but that's a lot of people, a lot of good players not playing for the Cornhuskers.
Yeah, man. If this team had a Hunter Salis, it certainly would make a difference. Not that they didn't try. I mean, they sure tried with him. I mean, they tried when he was a high school recruit. I mean, they gave it everything when he was in the transfer portal, and he wanted to go to Wake Forest. So, I mean,
they tried with Fiddler and William Kyle too. I remember last year.
So, I mean, it's not like they're not trying, and they had just made the NCAA tournament, so they definitely had something to sell to those guys. I don't know if maybe the NIL isn't quite where it needs to be with football. I'm not sure, but yeah, it is disappointing just to see this team really, really bottom out after we saw them, play so well. And, I just go back to that Iowa game, and they just never have recovered from that. And I just think back to what if they were able to close out that game? Where would we be right now? Because I don't think we'd be sitting here at 2-6 in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and after the Diamond Head Classic, I thought, okay, this team has figured it out. They struggled a little bit at the time, a couple weeks earlier against Michigan State, but now they've figured it out after the Diamond Head Classic, and they get things rolling. Then they had the UCLA game, and I thought, all right, this team, is really focused, really locked in, and they'll be able to play at a high level. And after the Iowa game, it's like the Monstars stole their powers, and now they don't know how to play basketball. So I don't know what's going on, but I mean, time is running out.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some people start talking about Fred Hoiberg, and I think that's way too premature at this point. But
see, Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, if you share your
He
thoughts.
made
What do
the
you think
NCAA
about
tournament,
that?
right, last year, which is obviously a big achievement, right? But
Mhm.
where has he had success, otherwise? You can point to the year before when, they had a winning record and they had Sam Greasel and, guys like Derek Walker. But the people who want him fired, I mean, I'm not going to say they have an absolute case, but they have a strong case because there hasn't been a ton of success beyond, these last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I'm pulling up his record here, which hasn't, the first few years weren't great, and it really felt like this program had turned a corner, and that's the frustrating thing is,
Yeah.
looking at that UCLA game, it just again that was like a mirage though because that program has been catering under Mick Cronin, so I mean, I think
And
that
Mick
that needs to
Cronin's made
be
sure to let you know about it. So
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's like, I don't know what has gotten into that guy, if he's off his meds or what, but he's been on a press conference tear the last month or so. Um, so yeah, it's really disappointing that it's gone like it has, but I don't know. I still think that Fred's the best guy for the job, but I don't know. I'm worried that it's going to start going the way that it went with Tim Miles, but you know,
yeah.
I still feel like this team, I don't know, I felt like he was finally going to get it back to, or not back, but I thought he was going to get this program to, consistent, like multiple NCAA tournament bursts. And it seemed like that was happening, this season. And now it's completely falling apart. And like, look, if they won some of these games, like they could turn around quickly. It's not, I know everybody's discounting this team from making the NCAA tournament. If they won 3 in a row, they would be, projected in. Like they're not that far from it, but I do see where, they're tied for 16th in the league right now. So they're not even guaranteed to make the Big Ten postseason, or the NIT for that matter. And I'll just say this: if they miss a postseason tournament, if they don't even make the NIT this year, I think the seat is going to be somewhat hot on Fred Hoiberg going into next season. And I think it's going to be very difficult to survive 2 years. Like if they don't make the NIT or NCAA tournament this year or next year, I think it'll be tough to survive that with the resources and everything that is being put into this program.
So this brings me to the question, and we talked about this before, but I think it's worth revisiting again. What is the ceiling for this basketball program? Was the NCAA tournament last year the ultimate ceiling for this program, or could it be something bigger? Because I think that kind of plays into it too. I mean, how far can this program go? Have we gone to where it can go, and that's it?
I mean, I still feel like this program can win a tournament game. I don't know why it hasn't. It's just,
I agree with that.
beyond
Yeah, yeah.
it's beyond me. I don't know that it's ever going to be a team that competes for like a national championship. I mean, I do think that there's more resources, committed to winning Nebraska basketball than there's ever been, but I still don't know if it's, you know, where it needs to be to, say like win a national championship. But basketball now too is such a random sport, and the
Mm.
tournament's so random. Like if you just get lightning in a bottle, like Nebraska could have had with Tomanog. Like I think that team, if they had played in the right matchup, had got a better matchup, then maybe they could have, played their way into the Sweet 16. I mean, we saw them play, had the lead against Illinois before they fell apart. So it's just like it's really hard to say because I feel like football and basketball are two totally different things, like in terms of teams making a run. And I still feel like the potential is there for this team to reach the second weekend of the NCAA tournament or this program, but things have to go, just right. And for whatever reason, they haven't. And, I think Fred's taken it in a good direction, but the one good thing, I guess, for next year is you've got ranked mass coming back, and that, will be a positive thing, but he's going to really have to get it done in the transfer portal. And you're also losing, your two best players from this team. And so that's not going to be easy to replace.
Yeah, and I do wonder if a little bit more focus should be put on high school recruiting. I'm not saying go all out, high school recruits only, but I am wondering just for depth purposes, um, if this team should focus a little bit more on recruiting the high school players. And because you look at, and I'm not even saying to go, try to get high school kids, recruit the whole process, yada yada yada. I mean, you look at that list that Mike Sauter put out. Maybe put a little bit more effort into trying to keep kids home. And I know that they have, and I know that, they've tried to throw all the resources they can, but I don't know. I just look at that list and I just see so many good players not staying in state, or even worse, going to Creighton.
Yeah, there's definitely, it's just a really interesting strategy. I do think that we're going to see the portal be less of a focus because there's going to be fewer of those guys that are like, have the COVID year and all that type of stuff. So we're not going to see as many of those guys in the portal. Um, and yeah, I do think the way to build a truly sustainable program is to recruit players who are ranked, 50 to like 125, 50 to 150, I guess, if you're Nebraska, maybe even a little bit lower, that 75 to, 150 range. If you can get 2 or 3 players like that every class and then develop them. And, that's where you can have a multi-year guy who's, a really solid Big Ten. And they haven't done that very much since Fred Hoiberg has been here. I mean, even Casey was a transfer. I mean, he came from a junior college, and Fred certainly developed him, but he was a transfer up. So it's really hard to sit there and I'm trying to think about homegrown players here. I mean, they had Bryce McGowens was obviously a great player for a year, but I mean, almost every guy's been a transfer, so that he is going to have to like Nick Janowski will be a great kind of test case for his ability to do that, because they need him to be ready next year. He needs to be a player next year. I mean, the way that this roster is set up, his scoring ability, like they desperately need that guy to step in. And
Yeah.
I'm also looking at like, Gavin Griffiths has been a major disappointment. I mean,
Yeah.
and I don't know what it is, but when I see that dude on the sideline, he looks like a team manager instead of a player. He does not look like he's built to play Big Ten college basketball. And
I've always thought
I'm
the
just
same thing, but I never wanted to say it like that.
like,
But
what in
yeah.
the world? He does not. It's like, do you guys have a strength program? I mean, he looks like even skinnier than last year. So I'm just like, what in the world is going on with this guy? I thought he was, he
Yeah.
was like a top 50 recruit.
Yeah, he was.
So, the development, I think, is a bit of an issue right now, because I just, off the top of my head, I mean, outside of, if you want to count, Tominaga, I guess, Sam Hoiberg to an extent, you could say is really developed into a great player at Nebraska. Not a great player, but, a very reliable
Contributor,
player.
yeah. Yeah.
But, and it's not like Gary and Bryce Williams haven't got better. I mean, Fred does make players better, especially offensively, but that hasn't really been the case this year. I mean, the shooting has not been well, and just, I don't know. The one thing they've got to get figured out, and this might be where the high school recruiting comes in, is they've got to figure out point guard, because this is 2 years
Yeah.
in a row that they basically don't have a point guard. And last year they got away with it because Tominaga could do so much, and this year without him, it's just really glaring, the lack of a true reliable two-way point guard.
And you mentioned something interesting. Bryce Williams, Juan Gary, they've developed well under Fred Hoiberg. Tominaga's developed well under Fred Hoiberg, but they weren't recruited by Fred Hoiberg. They were brought in already with, playing experience from the transfer portal. I mean, the biggest knock on Fred Hoiberg that many people have said, and I've always thought this too, is that he hasn't done a good job while he's been here of recruiting a high school kid and then subsequently developing him. He's been able to add to the skills of the transfer portal guys, but he hasn't been able to, develop too many high school kids. And, I think honestly, when looking at the bigger picture now, last year's NCAA tournament run kind of swept some of these problems under the rug a little bit, as an NCAA tournament run will do. But that's the lack of high school development and the lack of, I guess, overall player development. I mean, you just mentioned Gavin Griffiths. I had to make sure he was still on the roster. I mean, so, I think you make a really solid point there. And I think development overall, in terms of developing high school players, has been a problem throughout Hoiberg's tenure. And we're starting to see that now, I think.
And I mean, they landed some solid players in 2024, but the 2025 class, they got Quentin Rhymes. That's it, and he's ranked 231 according to the On3 rankings. So that's hard. That's not enough. That puts it all on the transfer portal. So yeah, they've got to figure out high school recruiting at some level, because that if you're not getting those players who can contribute and be part of your team, then you're having to rebuild every single year. And as we're seeing, that's tough to do. Whether it's Fred, and it's not just Fred Hoiberg. It's
No.
when you redo your entire team. I mean, look at USC. I mean, they're kind of they just beat Nebraska, but they're obviously in a similar situation. I mean, they're 4-4 in the Big Ten, but it's just difficult when you have an entirely new roster, and sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it can work. Like those guys just beat Illinois, so like it's starting to come together for them. Maybe it still can for Nebraska. It did at the end of last season, but it's just a lot of variables. And yeah, so those guys who've come in the 2024 class, like they need to step up. And because you look at next season, man, it's Rink Mast, and you got Berkey, I guess would be your other guy, but a lot of these guys are leaving, so there'll be opportunities to improve quickly, but as we've seen this season, that's not a guarantee that you are going to improve.
And another thing that just came to my head, and this is a whole other rabbit hole we can spend 20 minutes talking about, is Fred Hoiberg just signed a new contract this past offseason.
Yeah, last year, yeah.
So
it was right around tournament time last year.
Yeah, right around tournament time. Things are looking good. Nebraska has historically eaten a ton of contracts with buyouts and stuff like that. So, if anything, we're right on schedule. No, but this contract extension, I mean, do you think that's a concern as well if Nebraska has to eat even more money than what they've already historically eaten? Yes, I know, different sport, football, but I mean, do you think the contract extension now kind of plays into things if things kind of go downward?
A little bit. I don't know what the buyout is. I'd have to look at. It's probably pretty high for the first couple years. But like I said, I think it's way too early to move on from Fred Hoiberg. I think he's a really good college coach, and this season's disappointing. I still have hopes that they're at least going to find a way to turn around and make the NIT and not miss the Big Ten tournament. But if they miss the Big Ten tournament, I mean, he's definitely going to be on the hot seat. I don't know if it's going to be one of those he gets fired if they don't have a great year next year, but I'm trying to think of a scenario where he could be fired. Maybe if they miss the Big Ten tournament this year and next year, maybe that would force them to make a move depending on what the buyout is. But I feel like he is going to get a little more leeway. One, in the sense that he has gotten this team to the NCAA tournament, and two, he does have that pedigree of being able to do it at Iowa State and some of these other things. So it kind of goes back to that same thing. I know people have mentioned this with Matt Rule, and I've said this before. It's not the idea of not finding a replacement isn't a reason to stick with the guy, but who would you get to replace Fred Hoiberg? I mean, I know that people have thrown out the name Tyronn Lue before. I don't know if that is remotely viable at all.
What about a Creighton of some sort?
Yeah, maybe. Could be, and it's not like there's not good coaches out there. There's mid-major guys who are ready to take the leap. So, it's not like you couldn't find somebody, but I still think Fred Hoiberg is, one of the better, college basketball coaches out there. I just think, this is a tough job.
So the buyout for Fred Hoiberg's contract signed, I said this past offseason, but it's 2025 now. So this contract was signed on March 24, and he signed a 2-year contract extension that runs through the 29 season. The buyout decreases by $3.5 million for each season Hoiberg stays at Nebraska. The buyout is also reduced based on Hoiberg's salary at his next job. If Hoiberg leaves for another college coaching position, the buyout is $2 million. If Hoiberg leaves to become a NBA head coach or general manager, the buyout is $500,000. So I think if he were to be let go or whatever, Nebraska wouldn't have too much money on the books. It sounds like his buyout decreases if he is fired or let go. Although, to be fair, it also sounds like the language for being fired or let go wasn't really added into his contract. So we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Big game, Sunday against Wisconsin on the road, and we'll see, where this team's at. The next 4 games will tell us a lot about this team, and if they find a way to win a couple, then I think they'll probably find a way to make the NIT. But if they lose the next 4 games and they go on a 9-game losing streak, then it could get worse before it gets better. So
Which is
hopefully.
so disappointing with the talent of this roster. That would be so disappointing.
So, anyways, all right, let's switch to some football here. We've got a few other topics before we wrap up for today. So, I have to bring this up because it was pure joy to me. It was pretty hilarious. But Matt Rule in the preseason, I can't remember if this was, maybe it was Big Ten Media Days or just a press conference, but at any rate, he had said that the Big Ten is the NFL of college football, and they deserved 4 teams in the playoff every year, which Paul Feinbaum, responded that Matt Rule should stay in his lane and he needs to worry about, getting enough wins to play in the crappy bowl game, basically. And then, so Matt Rule kind of, threw his words back in his face, basically put together a little graphic that showed their interaction at the start of the season and then showed Paul Feinbaum admitting that the Big Ten owns college football after Ohio State, of course, won the second straight national championship for the conference. So, is that true? Do you think that the Big Ten kind of runs college football now? And how much did you enjoy Matt Rule's online slam of Paul Feinbaum?
First, let me say that I loved Matt Rule's online slam of Paul Feinbaum because Paul Feinbaum is obnoxious and annoying, and I know he brings in ratings, and I know whatever he says, gets the clicks and whatever, and that's his job, but he still is obnoxious and annoying. I'm not going to say the Big Ten runs college football yet, but what I will say is that, interestingly enough, once other teams have been allowed to pay players and use NIL and stuff like that, the playing field has shockingly evened out. So I will say it's made college football more even, and I know people want to, have their gripes about the college football playoff format itself and things like that, but this, to me, it says, that the Big Ten is, really strong right now, but it also says that now that the playing field has evened monetarily, the SEC is not going to be as dominant as it used to be.
Yeah, no, I do think that there's some truth to the fact that once other schools started paying players, it definitely changed things for the SEC. And yeah, it's just funny how it all works out and how everybody acts like Nick Saban was a great coach. Don't get me wrong, but he was a great bagman too, and that's why he won a lot of games. And personally, I think that Nick Saban's recruiting had more to do with Nick Saban winning than anything he ever did on the sideline. And people can rip me for that, but look what he did with the Dolphins. He was an average Joe. You know what I mean? Like he won a title with LSU, but LSU's notorious for paying players like this. Like I truly believe in my heart of hearts, and I know people will rip me for this, but I don't believe that Nick Saban or Kirby Smart or any of those guys could have went to Michigan and won a national title like they did without paying players up the wazoo. And now that we're seeing that those guys can't do it, and that other teams are starting to do it, their results are falling off a little bit. We'll see what happens, but all of a sudden Georgia, and all these teams don't seem quite as scary as they used to.
No, I think it's good for college football. And I think it's good for the Big Ten Conference because there are a lot of talented teams, and just side note, I can't believe we took this Ohio State team down to the wire. When you look back at everything now, it is kind of crazy with a Marcus Satterfield led offense, but no, it seemed like Ohio State. People were clowning on Ohio State for spending all sorts of money and things like that, but they proved that the reality of today's college football is that you spend what you need to in order to win, and they did that. And it's also crazy the trajectory of Ryan Day's tenure at Ohio State after the Michigan game. Me and you and obviously many others were wondering if he should be fired, and now he looks pretty good.
Yeah, it's funny that both Big Ten coaches that won national championships at one point their fan bases wanted them fired. Jim Harbaugh, everybody wanted him fired in 2021. Everybody wanted Ryan Day fired in Ohio State literally a few weeks ago. So maybe that should be a lesson to fans that we don't always know what we're talking about, and that patience sometimes, I know this is crazy, but sometimes patience can be a virtue. So just keep that in mind, Nebraska fans.
Well, I remember I was thinking, should Matt Rule be on the hot seat? And you were wondering if he should be fired. And then he went off and won a bowl game. So, I mean, patience is tough. I still think Ryan Day lucked out by getting a lot of talented Ohio State rosters very early in his tenure. But now that he's won a national championship, he has something to fall back on and kind of point towards. So good for him. I mean, he managed to change the media narrative around him and the fan perspective around him in just a matter of weeks, and that's hard to do in college football.
Yeah, that's what now we need. Now we need Matt Rule to do that next year.
National
Go on a
championship?
no, but just change the narrative of like people saying he can't beat top 25 teams and yada yada yada. Like I just would love to see, Nebraska go on a nice run here. But it is interesting that they took they had the national champions on the ropes. I mean, we outplayed the national champs in their stadium, and so that's something to think about when we want to sit here and say like, oh, Nebraska doesn't have the talent to do this or to do that. I mean, on that Saturday, they were the better team and they just didn't win the game. So what's crazy though is if they had, Ohio State would not have been in this playoff. Like literally, they're a couple of Dylan Raiola passes away from not even being in this playoff. And maybe if they lose to Nebraska, maybe they don't then lose to Michigan. Like you don't know how things are going to work out, but yeah, it was that close. Nebraska having that big of an impact on the playoff chase.
Although I do have to say, I wonder if Ohio State took us seriously, because you saw after that game, they really kind of were like, all right, let's turn it up. I mean, it looked like a completely different offense.
I do think that there was something to the fact that Nebraska got pounded 56-7 the week before, so Ohio State probably was like, these guys aren't that great. And then was that before or after they played Oregon? I'm trying to think. I can't quite remember.
I'm gonna look it up for you while you talk.
But anyway, because I mean, if that was right after the Oregon game, like I could see, them looking past a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that was a really interesting, matchup for Nebraska. But those are the games where Dylan really needs to step up this year. And I think
Ohio State had a bye week after the Oregon game, so that
okay. And then okay, yeah. But at any rate, so let's yeah, the Big Ten's going to be fun to watch, and it'll be fun to see where we kind of stick with it next year. I did want to get to some roster updates and positions before we change, or before we close out the show here. And so just a couple of things on the roster stuff. There are going to be obviously guys, coming in and out of the roster with the 105-man limit. So some players who aren't on the roster anymore: Alex Bullock, Barrett Liebentritt, Trevor Ruth, Danny Pasco, Blake Cosman, Tavon Thompson. Obviously, most of those names you don't know, but Alex Bullock and Liebentritt, probably guys that you would know as a Nebraska football fan. So they're no longer on the roster. And we've also got some position changes, according to Sean Callahan. Jaden Doss is going to be moving back to receiver. He obviously moved from wide receiver to cornerback last spring. So he's going to be moving back to receiver, and Roger Gradney is going to be moving from safety to linebacker. So I like both of those moves, and I think it's smart with Jaden Dawes. I think it makes a lot of sense in the fact that they just tried to get Jonah Wilson, and he went out the door. And so now, after losing four recruits from the 2023 and 24 classes to the portal, now they've added three guys that have, kind of multiple years of experience back to the receiver room, if you count Jaden Doss along with Isaiah Hunter and Hardly Gilmore, plus, the incoming freshman.
Jaden Doss is like the Tommy Hill of the new era. I mean, yeah. Doss is an extremely talented athlete. And I had kind of wondered if there would be a little bit of movement after Ishmael Smith-Flores entered the portal, and they had him penciled in at linebacker after originally recruiting him as a tight end. So I'm not. I am a little bit bummed about Alex Bullock in the sense that I really liked his effort while I was here. He wasn't the fastest, or he didn't have the most explosive game, but he served his role well. He served his role well, and he was a good wide receiver, I thought. But now you're looking at a wide receiver room that's just absolutely loaded with talent. And, I think you're going to see the talent in the wide receiver room reach levels that we haven't seen in quite some time. And, I don't want to say we're already there, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I think it's definitely getting there. And it is going to be fun to see all those guys come together. I am excited, at least interested in Roger Gradney moving to linebacker. 4-star recruit, the 2024 class. I think he kind of had some injury issues last year, if I'm remembering correctly. So, safety moving down to linebacker, um, you know, I always like guys who can run and who can cover, and so that'll be somewhat interesting. And then on the transfer portal side of things, it definitely seems like Nebraska doesn't have much room for guys. Sean Callahan kind of intimated that, or hinted that there is no roster spots left. We kind of saw that with Jonah Wilson, so I don't know how that. So it seems like if there's going to be any other additions in the transfer portal, it would have to be kind of like a major guy that, to really make things happen and maybe kick someone else off the roster at this point. So it feels like, for all intents and purposes, in terms of this winter window, I think Nebraska is pretty much done with transfer portal additions.
And there is still a spring window, if I'm not mistaken, right? I'm wondering.
Yeah. Yep. There is a 10-day spring window. So
I'm wondering if we'll see anything there. Maybe another tackle or something. I know George Fitzpatrick from Ohio State just entered the portal. He's a guy that interests me. I'm not saying that Nebraska is in on him or anything, but so I'm wondering if they'll do anything in the spring window. But for now, I think the roster for next season is mostly set. I feel comfortable in saying that.
yeah, I think so too. I know there was some talk about Jeff Percy, the guy from Michigan, that Nebraska maybe had some interest, and he maybe is the guy that would come like on a walk-on deal because he's only started 3 games in his career. So he probably wouldn't mind, that type of thing. So you could see something like that. I feel like they still do need offensive line help, maybe a running back, but Mackay Nelson's really turning some heads, so he's going to be in the mix. Quinn Ives, is also another guy. So I guess they're just going to kind of see how spring plays out. And at the very least, they got Elijah Pritchett. So I feel like you've got him and Gatula. So you've got 2 guys who, started like last year. I mean, Gatula started most of the year last year and held up decently well. So I feel like, you could get by with those 2 guys as long as, they can stay healthy. And that's, we've talked about that. That's always a concern. But if they were to add somebody, offensive tackle would be number 1 for me. And then, a big D lineman, a 330-pound D lineman has been on my wish list for all offseason, but that's probably not going to happen. And then, running back would be 3rd. Running back, I'm not that worried about running back.
I think you're going to see a lot of production from the freshman running back Booth and Parker. I honestly think that they're going to be able to carve a role because you're at the point now where if you don't play your freshmen, when they have an opportunity, they're going to be gone. So I think that honestly plays a factor into it as well. I know it sounds kind of silly to say, but would you agree with me that, you're at the point where you start playing some of your young guys in hopes of retaining them on the roster? I think the days of storing and keeping them away for multiple seasons is a thing of the past.
Yeah, especially if they're ready to play. Like, guys know if they're kind of like, they know if they should be in the 2 deep or not. And so, it is, guys aren't waiting anymore, and like Dante Dowdell, even though he left, like, he was a good example of that. I mean, he could have stayed at Oregon and, he was a good player. They misused his red shirt, but he wanted to have a bigger role. And I think that's, you're going to see that. And he even played as a freshman there. So, I think there is some truth to that. And I've been pounding the table for Jamarian Parker for a very long time. And it would not surprise me if he came in and beat out all these guys for the number 2 job. And that's the thing is, like, running back, if there's one position where a guy can come in on like the first day of spring ball and, be somewhat effective, it's running back. And not, obviously you have to be able to pass protect Dylan Raiola. That's like job number 1, but you still have guys who can come in and they just have the natural ability to get yards. So I feel like with Booth or Parker, I think they do have enough depth in that running back room as long as Ives and Nelson can, take a step forward this spring, which I feel like they're pretty confident that they have done or will do already. Otherwise, I feel like they would have added someone in the portal.
It's time to see what Ives can do, right? He's been in the program for a couple of years now, and we've heard great things about him, and now it's time to see what he can do. I mean, part of it is yeah, definitely. And part of it, too, is just seeing what these guys can do now. You have them on your roster. Let's see what they can do. And honestly, and I'll just say this right now, I predict Parker is a guy that they're going to have to throw a good amount of money at to stay here because I think teams are going to be coming after him pretty fierce.
And then for our special teams coach update, we don't really have an update. So that's the update. We don't know. I don't think anybody knows anything about the special teams coaching search because if it was going to be the guy, I've been talking about Mark Scott from Baylor, he would have been hired already. So I don't know if it's somebody that's working on one of these NFL teams, like I really don't know what's going on, but I still think it'll be done before the end of this month. But I
Kansas
have
City
no,
Chiefs special teams coach, maybe. I don't know.
or maybe some analyst, or that's, yeah, I thought that too, or maybe I'd have to
So
look at
Dave
who's on all
Barrett and
these.
Terry Braden are now on the, are connected within the program. So
Yeah.
I don't
So
know.
yeah, it could be. I don't know who. I'm not sure why it's taken so long, but it makes me think it's somebody who's still on one of these coaching staff. So maybe I'll have to start doing some research. But yeah, no update now. I'm not worried though. Matt Rule's done a great job for the most part with his hires, so I think he'll find a good coach.
And it was good to see and it was good to see Marcus Satterfield on the road recruiting as a tight ends coach. So I mean,
Yeah, so it seems like he's sticking around, and
and
I
he's done a
think
good job. People are like, "Oh, he can't recruit," and blah blah blah. But he has done a decent job with the tight end position. So I'm not I'm not against him, being the tight ends coach at all. I think that's honestly a better role for him there. I think he's a good coach with smaller responsibilities. I think the offensive coordinator position at Nebraska was just too much for him.
Yeah, and sometimes guys like know football, they know ball, they just can't call plays. Like calling
Yeah,
plays is a whole different thing. So like I think having a guy who's been, an offensive coordinator and had all the experience that he's had, as like a position coach, I think is fine. And I don't
yeah.
personally, I could care less what he makes. I know people are like,
Shut up.
oh,
Ooh, yeah,
it's not
that's my
coming out of
favorite.
my
Ooh,
paycheck. I
you're
don't give
making
a
5 million. I
crap.
don't know, dude. Why does it matter? You're not paying the money. Like,
I
why
know.
the hell does it matter?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It does not matter to me one bit. So like anyway, it's not preventing Nebraska from getting another coach because they're paying him. So yeah, anyways, hopefully they do get somebody hired soon, and we can hear the complaints about that, because that's life as a Nebraska fan. But yeah, it's a great time to be a Husker football fan, though, I feel like, and we're trending in the right direction. We did make the top 25 of Ari Wasserman and Andy Staples from On3. We're ranked 25th, and I feel like that's just about right where we should be.
I say it every year that I feel like it's just about right, and then inevitably I get my heart ripped out. So I will just say that yes, they did rank them, and we'll see in August.
I'm like the Michael Scott meme. I'm here to get hurt again. I'm ready every
All
year.
the pieces are there, and I know we've said that a lot, but all the pieces are there. It's just about finally, kind of breaking through and getting over that hump. So again, the schedule is very favorable. The schedule is very friendly, and I'm honestly excited for spring practices, because I think although spring doesn't tell us too much, there are going to be some positions like wide receiver and the emergence of the running backs like Nelson and Ives and stuff like that I'll be watching for. So I'm excited for that too.
Yeah, I'm excited for actual football again, which will be coming up pretty soon. So we'll wrap it up there, you guys. I did want to mention we're going to be trying to do a little shorter videos coming up, soon on the channel. So keep an eye out for that. Maybe a little more news reaction, things like that. We'll still have maybe like one long podcast episode a week, but maybe this long form we won't have quite as much. So just keep an eye out for some more of our content. Make sure you hit the like button, hit subscribe, get into the comment section, and as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.